Themselves as a start, that would be awesome.
Sure. Guess I'll hop in here. My name's Will. I live in Western Massachusetts. I helped get Regen spun up back in 2017, along with Christian and Gregory. Gregory, many of you have crossed paths with. Um, I guess I did not come to the crypto space because I was like, we need this like kind of global global alternative to money. I came into it actually from local economics and from local food systems, and Cosmos's vision around these like self-sovereign application specific chains is like totally up my alley. So I'm so glad we found Cosmos. That happened I guess in 2018. We got woven in New York City and got to meet up with everybody, Sunny and Jay and Bucky and kind of all the crew then, and got wrapped into everything back then. I guess a few years back, I spun out of Regen Network development and have been focusing my time on the nonprofit side since then, Regen Foundation. And the foundation is really focused on getting governance rights of Regen token holders, like getting Regen tokens in the hands of the stakeholders that wouldn't otherwise have them. So smallholder farmers, rights of nature projects, indigenous nations. I'm introducing myself right now, but we'll get more and more into regen as we go here. I guess regen's very much focused on ecological and in some ways also social regeneration and health. So yeah, I guess we'll cover a bunch of ground here. So I'll pause there and hand it over to Sarah.
Hey y'all, can you hear me?
Yep.
I think you can.
Yep.
Cool. Just double checking. I live on a mountain, so sometimes the internet's not that great. I'm Sarah. I've been with the Regen Network protocol since late 2019. So me and Will are old friends in the world of bringing Regen Network to reality in the earlier days. I currently am Regen Network Development Incorporated's Director of Ecosystem. So I work weaving lots of things together on behalf of the protocol. And, Regen Network's goal using our blockchain technology overall is really to use the financial system and to build software that allows for on-the-ground communities, like people who manage parks, people that own farms, people that protect waterways and forests, to be able to use the financial system to incentivize ecological action and ecological restoration. A lot of my work is helping to inform software development and bringing to the table in that process my experience both as a trader on Wall Street, as well as my experience being a park designer and landscape designer. So I kind of sit on both sides of the finance side and the what does it really mean to, restore a forest or rebuild a park or, look at a riparian buffer or take a look at what a windbreak could do that's ecologically positive for pollinators. I sit kind of at the intersection between those two things. So thanks for having us today. I'm excited to kind of dig into some cool stuff that's happening, and particularly with our relationship to the osmosis community. So excited to get going here.
Yeah, likewise. Really, really glad to have you all here and looking forward to kind of diving in a little bit more. Just kind of to start before I know you've given sort of a brief overview here, but before we dive into the regen and osmosis related stuff, would you mind just kind of giving us a background on Regen Network and this idea around regenerative finance?
You want to take that one, Sarah?
Yeah, we can go back and forth here. So originally, Christian and Gregory were working as permaculture designers and consultants in essentially agricultural supply chain. So things like cacao farms in Ecuador. And in their work, they really came to realize that there was a need for more financial incentivization for land stewards to do these types of projects, and that there was a need to have a system that allowed for good science, innovative science, to monitor those ecological outcomes and communicate them to the world, and a system where communities that are not normally communities holding power have a voice and a hand in the governance of those systems and standards. And so the role of blockchain in our effort of restoring ecology is really to provide the software tools and the community governance tools and the cultural tools that start to allow that vision to emerge. And so regenerative finance is a term about using finance, using money, to put capital in the hands of communities that can really implement these on-the-ground ecological restoration projects. They're planting trees, they're restoring farms, real world, real land projects like these. And regenerative finance is a conversation around what's the social structure, decision-making mechanism, and power structures that must be necessary in order for that system of finance itself to be socially and economically regenerative as well as ecologically regenerative. Do you want to add anything, Will? Because I know you have your own way of kind of communicating regenerative finance.
Yeah, sure. So I've told this story a few times over the last few months, so hopefully it won't be too much of a repeat for those of you who've been on other spaces. But in 2009, Gregory, our CEO of Regen Network Development Public Benefit Corp, he convened this financial permaculture gathering. So, as Sarah mentioned, there's been a strong thread of regenerative agriculture and permaculture amongst the Regen team since long before Regen Network was a thing. And there's, I guess, a whole world we could get into around, what is regenerative ag, what is permaculture, but a lot of it has to do with really like how do we take a holistic and living systems approach to how we do things. And then, of course, you can use permaculture on landscapes, or you can use it in finance and business. And so that summit in 2009 kind of kicked off this lineage of what could regenerative finance look like. And in 2013, Ethan and Gregory, Ethan's kind of another, not Ethan Buckman, Ethan Soloviev, co-wrote this book called Regenerative Enterprise. And it was, how do we apply regenerative thinking to an enterprise ecology? And just as we look at the osmosis community, I mean, osmosis is powerful because it is this nodal point where all of these networks intersect, where we have all of these different tokens, all these different communities coming together, and all that kind of rich interplay that happens at those intersections. You can do that same kind of thing in many other spheres, and looking at kind of enterprise ecologies was one of the applications there. And I had met Gregory at this Slow Money event in 2010, looking at how do we do this with local food systems instead of one-off. Instead of like one-off helping this one farm or this one commercial kitchen or this one brewery, what's it look like to have an enterprise ecology and approach it more holistically? And so I guess just to say, there's certainly many other thinkers and doers out there that have contributed to this field, but just that's the kind of immediate lineage that by 2017 there'd already been at that point kind of almost a decade of thinking going into what could regenerative finance look like. That then you layer on blockchain, remote sensing, some of the other really exciting technologies that were starting to take off back then, and things get really interesting.
Awesome. And so just kind of jumping in, I guess, to the the meat of this. This all kind of centers around, or I guess maybe a good way to say this is one of Regen's solutions to this is the Nature Carbon Ton token. Can you tell us a little bit about NCT for short, and sort of like what does this look like on the supply side? What from what I understand, this is a a real world asset backed token, and I definitely interested in learning more about the token itself and the economic and real world activity that underlies it.
Cool. So to set the context for this, I think most folks are familiar with the sort of like meteoric launch of our friends at KlimaDAO, which was maybe almost a year and a half now ago. So the way that the carbon markets work, which is really the primary use case that Regen Network's software technology is meant to address at this juncture, The way that those markets work is that they're commodities, real world financial commodities where ecological outcomes for real land-based projects or solar projects or other types of carbon emission reduction or carbon removal activities are quantified across the globe. And the way they work at a pattern level is that there are scientific methodologies that have to be followed when implementing a project that are essentially the mathematical instructions by which you calculate outcomes, and then they get to be issued as real world commodity assets. But what Regen Network is trying to do is really disrupt that legacy market system. And we really are doing it with three pillars overall. And this will lead us to where NCT fits in this. One is we're using blockchain technology to make all of those data and claims and trade mechanisms 100% transparent. Right now in these systems, you can't see what that science is. You can't see the raw data. You can't find that location on a map. You can't hold that claim accountable because a lot of the data points to replicate its math that produces the asset volumes is just hidden away. Then a lot of the way that these markets work is there are these institutional broker systems with really, frankly, centralized power that control who gets these credits, who sells these credits, who buys these credits, the prices and volumes of these credits. It's kind of like a carbon oligarchy, which we're trying to disrupt by creating open, permissionless marketplaces. Then you have in the system the fact that a lot of these standards that issue these credits from these legacy systems, like Vera or Gold Standard, which are entirely off blockchain, is that there's sort of like a centralized closed group loop of scientists and carbon market professionals that decide what the standards are. And those standards aren't publicly governed. There are limited voices from on the ground, real land practitioner communities involved in the creation of those standards. The processes, because they're centralized, are very expensive. And so most of the world's small and medium scale projects are excluded from these crediting systems. So all of our efforts in this area are really meant to disrupt this, to distribute decision-making, to distribute science, to distribute power, and to make it so that the system is accessible by small land stewards around the world, and the system is accessible by the average person like you and I that aren't necessarily carbon market experts. So Regen has its own registry that is not these legacy registry systems that we've been building for 5 years. And out of all the blockchain technology dealing with the carbon markets, we have the only backend technology that's designed to serve standards processes and standards governance. On our evolution to build this technology, we partnered up with Toucan and Moss and the Blockchain Infrastructure Carbon Offsetting Working Group during the KlimaDAO launch. Because what happened was what Klima and Toucan did together is they said, there are credits from the Vera registry off the blockchain. We are just going to bring these assets on chain and we're going to digitize them. So all different kinds of assets came onto the blockchain that were real world assets now in digital form. You had hydro credits, you had solar credits, you had projects that were very old, you had projects that were very new. And we as nature people, with our goal being to restore ecology and ecosystem function at a planetary scale, we sat down with our partners and we said, okay, this is a big pile of real world assets. Frankly, these are dozens of different types of assets. How do we at least segment the nature assets? Because the market off the blockchain considers them to be significantly higher quality types of assets. And so we went through the Vera registry together and said, okay, what is the list of methodologies that are the nature credits? And we created this standard called Nature Carbon 10, which literally is just an inclusion criteria for a fungible token or any of these individual carbon credits that were created by this list of nature-based methodologies. So water credits, your soil credits, your forest credits, et cetera, et cetera. All of these kinds of credits can go into this fungible token standard, nature carbon ton. And so we work to help bring as much of this nature market onto the blockchain as we could to help the Toucan launch and develop the NCT standard, which is a standard governed by the Toucan protocol. And then we basically have been waiting for a year in order to bring the liquidity that the Regen Network community owns of nature carbon ton into Cosmos. Because we always thought, okay, cool, they brought these credits on the Polygon, they digitized them, sweet, good first step to carbon markets becoming digital. You know, we'll take incremental improvements here. And then we've been waiting to bring these over to the osmosisDex to create nature carbon ton liquidity pools so that there are liquid carbon tokens available that are affordable and nature-based for all the Cosmos community to offset protocol footprints and validator footprints and, you know, put these into dApps and do all kinds of cool things that are available to the communities that are in building essentially refi projects or climate impact projects that are right now over in Polygon and Celo. So this arc that we're on is about bringing this liquidity into Cosmos and creating cross-chain liquidity for a single carbon token standard that can move between Cosmos, Polygon, and Celo. Maybe I'll pause there and just see what other questions you might have, because there's a lot of information.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That was a really good bit of information about the regenerative, bringing the nature carbon tons to Cosmos and whatnot. And as you were talking about that and speaking about Toucan and all of that, I wanted to ask how you are bringing that liquidity over to Cosmos. I know there's like a Polygon region bridge that's kind of proprietary to you guys. I was wondering if you had any information that you wanted to talk a little more on that, and then after that, I'll start talking a little bit about the NCT Osmo pools and our relationships.
Cool. Yeah, totally. So there is about to be the launch of a bridge between Polygon main chain and Regen Ledger. And I'll just explain briefly how it works. So the bridge will be two ways. You can use it via Regen Marketplace in order to send NCT tokens from Regen Ledger to Polygon and from the Toucan protocol interface to bring them from Polygon over. So the long tail of this is that liquidity that's in SushiSwap is going to move to liquidity on Osmosis. And there's at least 175,000 nature carbon tons that will hop over this bridge that have been set aside for this process a long time ago. The way it works and the reason it has to come onto Regen Ledger at this juncture instead of, you know, hopping down Axelar or Gravity or other things, it has to do with the way that the relationship between individual carbon credits that are digitized and fungible carbon tokens exists. So on the Polygon side, underneath of an NCT token, it's really a voucher, one-to-one for individual credits underneath of it. And those are called in the world of Toucan, the TCO2 token. And the reason that's important is that in the carbon credit world, every vintage project location combination, so this place with outcomes for this year, that combination is fungible. So Park A's 2019 carbon credit vintages are all seen as the same credit. But they are not the same as 2020's credits and 2021's credits and 2022's credits. So the data that is underneath of the NCT tokens on the Polygon side says that it has to be redeemed into an individual TCO2. That TCO2 then travels across the bridge. It's burned on the Polygon side, and then it is minted onto Regen Ledger as an eco credit, reinstantiating that core individual credit data. And then you can hop it back into the NCT via the basket module functionality on Regen Network, where we'll create the mirrored standard of NCT on Regen Ledger. And anybody that has those individual eco credits that meet the criteria, you can then put them into that and get yourself an NCT token. It's the NCT fungible tokens that end up starting on SushiSwap and taking this, journey across the bridge. And it's the same representation of that NCT token that ends up being able to be moved over to the osmosisDex. So we'll have lots of guides on this because there's like one extra layer in this than, just shoving a governance token across the Axelar bridge, for example. And it really has to do with the data integrity of the scientific outcomes, the locations, the years, and the project. That is fundamentally critical market information about what an asset is and how it is valued by the broader financial market that sees all those assets as unique. Is that helpful? It's very technical.
Yes, no, that's very helpful. And I think kind of the gist of it for a lot of users is that there's a lot of backstage stuff going on with your bridge, and bringing it to Cosmos will, just like you were saying, make it a little bit easier and accessible for all users to have a part in that ecological action, right? So I think that's a really awesome thing to hear. Before I go into actually talking about the liquidity pools, I actually just wanted to ask if there were any deciding factors in bringing over to Cosmos. Kind of maybe if there was any reason that stood out as to why the Cosmos ecosystem was a place where regenerative finance might flourish.
I can give my personal reasons. I think Will might have his, own philosophy on this as well. We see Regen Network as really the home of regenerative finance. And, our blockchain is custom built from scratch for this application specific purpose. Everybody else in every other ecosystem is just like some quick and dirty Solidity code creating some sort of dApp. The underlying architecture is actually quite thin for, all of these situations. And what we're ending up finding is that because Regen Network has its own registry that produces natively blockchain-based ecological credits, and we have 2 million of these credits that are going to be issued on the Regen Network blockchain this year, we are essentially the supply source on the blockchain. And so from the perspective of Cosmos being a unique place beyond just the Regen functionality for regenerative finance, to me, it comes down to how every chain is really its own application-specific world. And so you could have a ton of dApps on Juno that just want to be cool games and, suck carbon credits into some particular, level of the game. You could have protocols offsetting. You could have all these different types of governance decision-making processes and integrations into core blockchains in the Cosmos ecosystem in this very decentralized, very open, very autonomous way that that culture doesn't really functionally exist in other blockchain ecosystems in the same way. Says that I personally think it's really important that the whole Cosmos ecosystem has a fairly large, open, affordable supply of digital carbon credits on its dexes. Says that the possibilities that have been offered to other blockchain communities, particularly on Polygon and Celo for the last year and a half, that the Cosmos community has access to those same types of assets at scale so that there can be innovation on any blockchain that chooses to do it, not just application-specific ones that are built, specifically for this, like Regen is. Do you have something you want to add, Will? Because I feel like you got your own world of Cosmos that you like to share.
Yeah. Well, so things move so fast in blockchain. There's, so many so many layer ones that weren't there when we first joined the space and first started looking at things. We actually had definitely considered other approaches before we jumped onto the Cosmos bandwagon. We were looking at like some kind of like proof of authority hybrid approach with proof of stake or something else like that. So I definitely think that well, I guess I'll say that we had been at DevCon 3 in Cancun. I guess that would have been in 2017, and something about the Ethereum community back then. Even then, the Ethereum community was growing so quickly that you launched a project in Ethereum and nobody cared. You know, it's like, oh, okay, like join the other 1,000 projects launching right now. And I think one of the things that hit us early on about Cosmos was it felt like the kind of place where people cared that you were there. If you were building something worthwhile, other people were going to help you out, and vice versa. You know, there was this kind of camaraderie where Regen Network development ended up taking on the maintainership of the Cosmos SDK and doing a lot of work there. And so there was just this kind of we're all in it together kind of attitude that a number of other blockchain communities didn't have that same sense. And of course, here we are, you know, 4 or 5 years later, Cosmos is a much bigger place, and there's of course different drama going on in different corners of the ecosystem, and I at the same time I feel like there's still something special about the community here, and I'm sure our CTO Aaron could speak about you know, technical reasons why we went the Cosmos path as opposed to other approaches. But I guess we won't get into that today. I guess I do want to take just a moment to come back. There had been this, we started out on MCT, and there's been some questions about that. And I guess just to take one step back, someone had asked in the chat, how do you list on Regen? And there's this guide, a program guide to getting a methodology listed. There's Regen Registry, which has some of these Regen originated credits. And just to take a step back to say, NCT is in some ways this kind of transitional way of bridging legacy and blockchain into one approach, where you have this basket, as Sarah was saying, that creates fungibility between this broad swath of nature-backed carbon solutions. At the same time, Regen has a pretty radical vision of, we don't just want to be kind of funding the traditional way of doing things here. We want to be funding a wide swath of truly regenerative projects, whether that's mangrove restoration or smallholder cacao growers in Ecuador, or whether that's blue carbon projects or biochar projects. There's just so many different ways that people can engage in regeneration that are not captured in the legacy approaches. So I think the other thing here is that I think we're finally at a place with Regen where all the infrastructure is in place, all the tools are there for people to develop a truly regenerative methodology, bring it on chain, start selling credits, start having revenues, and start funding this regenerative economy. So yes, NCT is an important step in that direction, and there's also like a bigger vision and like other things that we're also building.
Yeah, and you touched on this, but I do want to just kind of plug it again really quick that you know, that the Regen development contributors are also core contributors to the Cosmos stack, and you know, I think that a lot of other Cosmos chains that use the SDK really owe it to you know, among other parties, but really owe it to the Regen development contributors. How, you know, essentially how far along the stack has come since the early days when you all first started contributing to it. So just wanted to give my personal thanks for that. I don't feel like it's mentioned enough.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, from our perspective, we believe in community first, and so we try to hold on one hand the Regen Network community, and the other hand the success of the Cosmos community. And so since 2019 until maybe a month ago, our CTO and half of our engineering team has been the leadership and architecture leads for the SDK. So half of our time until now has actually been spent on the whole Cosmos community. We're at an interesting transition where we're starting to be able to mature our own stack. And so we've just been really grateful to be of service to the whole community this whole time. And I really think a lot of the meteoric rise of so many protocols in the Cosmos ecosystem, it largely rests on the stability and maturity of the SDK. So we're just really lucky to be in the community and get to do multiple cool blockchain building approaches at the same time. So another very cool and unique thing about the Cosmos community's ability to bring in lots of different people to contribute to public goods.
Yeah, no, it was awesome to hear you bring up like dApps and specific dApps and Cosmos utilizing the carbon credits and stuff. Like one thing that I'm super excited to see is the adaptation and evolving of those apps within Cosmos. I do think that this is a great place for innovation and experimentation. So just to move on real quick, I just wanted to talk now about the upcoming incentivized NCT Osmo pool, and kind of how Regen is building out a module that will enable allocating emissions directly from Regen's chain to Osmosis to kind of give quote unquote perpetual incentives into that pool. So Will or Sarah, if anyone wants to speak on that for a little bit.
I can take a stab at it, and Will can add stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I can't remember when exactly, but there was a point in time when Regen decided to essentially gift a giant pile of Regen to the Osmosis community a long time ago. Never really knowing what we would, team up to use it together if you guys would just use it for other purposes. And then we had last October a community vote around essentially creating this carbon market on Osmosis. And so the deal there is that there's going to be two NCT pools. One is NCT Osmo, one's NCT Regen. And that there's one more kind of like vote to deal with the incentive stuff, but it's kind of like they'll be equal size. And the one that is the Osmosis pool is supposed to have a combination of Osmo rewards and then whatever regions left over from forming these pools that Osmosis has are going to become Regen rewards, I think, on the Osmo pool. So it's going to be a really fun experiment to see how different folks in the Osmosis community and the broader Cosmos community interact with the first time there's carbon in the Cosmos community like this. It's the first carbon pool, the largest of its kind, obviously, in Cosmos. And there's, dozens of different protocols and validators that are offsetting that are going to jump in the pool and earn rewards and retire credits and go carbon neutral. And then there's also just this sort of unknown of how many people are going to invest in carbon because they're an investor and they think that's valuable. How many people are going to use this Osmosis pool, and the fact that the NCT is IBC compatible to then suddenly be able to integrate, liquid carbon tokens into their dApp or their cool game like Cosmic Horizon or, some other innovation that we haven't seen yet. So having that as a base resource for the whole community, to me, is like really the first step in the weird and wonderful innovations that are likely to come across the whole Cosmos community. That like we at Regen can't predict what that will look like, but every carbon token that's purchased and retired means that it's taken permanently out of circulation and used for a carbon claim like carbon footprint offsetting. So every time we use carbon, we grow the market for carbon, which then ultimately puts more money in the hands of these real world projects, as well as every time we retire carbon on a blockchain, we are essentially shrinking the supply of carbon on the blockchain, thus that the price has the potential to go up as well. So there's a lot of cool market mechanics that I'm really excited to watch go down. Do you have anything you want to add, Will? Because I know we kind of like totally think about things in different lenses, you and I.
I'm not sure that there's anything else I'll say on that one at the moment. I am excited to talk through some liquid staking things when we're ready, but I'll let Robo and Water Spinner guide the convo up to there.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, we will definitely get to some liquid staking. I just had a quick question. We're going to get into some game theory stuff that Sarah brought up with the demand of carbon markets and whatnot. Just real quick before we do that, I just wanted to ask a super simple question and get a brief, just a brief explanation. Quick difference in the Regen token and NCT token and what that is for you guys. Just a quick overview of that.
Yeah, 1 minute. The Regen token is the governance token of the Regen Network blockchain. If you want to participate in governing our technology, or in the future, which is forthcoming this year, governing ecological science standards, to do that, you need a Regen wallet and some Regen Network tokens. All eco credits, of which NCT would be considered essentially an eco credit, which are basically these tokenized, carbon assets. All of those are separate from the Regen token and assets issued on top of our blockchain technology. Those are, like I said before, just digital commodities. So any individual eco credit is seen as a digital commodity. Every one of them has a unique standard, and they can be traded as digital carbon, wherever they go. That's different than our core stack, which is where those tokens are issued onto using that technology and that metadata and that claim structure in our blockchain. So kind of like two different layers.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, thank you. Robo, you can take it away.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, is NCT minted using Token Factory, or is it like a CosmWasm token?
NCT is minted onto Regen Ledger using our Golang module called Eco Credit module. So it's a core blockchain module that allows for there to be a standard, which is called a credit class, which has a governing group or governing wallet address and issuance wallet address. So these are issued via that credit class using the Eco Credit module infrastructure on Regen Network's blockchain itself. So it's not CosmWasm, it's core Golang modules.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I just had that quick clarification question that came up. Wanted to make sure it got addressed. But one of the things that I've kind of been really excited to talk about, and Sarah, I kind of share your excitement about this, is sort of like the game theory behind all of this, right? I'm very fascinated in the idea that we can encourage people to do something that is, economically correct by financially incentivizing them to do so. And even in the the legacy systems, the traditional markets, this is sort of how that works, right? Where you have you're financially encouraging regenerative activity, but in a sense, blockchain takes this one step further, or at least that's how I envision this market working out. Right? Is now not only do you have you have consumers of these credits and suppliers of these credits, but you also have now this additional layer in the middle, degens, right, that are essentially going to be, purchasing, holding, LPing these assets for, I would imagine not all of them for the purpose of using them to retire them, or, so I just maybe hope that you can kind of speak for a second on like the demand hopes that you have for NCT that would sort of increase as a result of this on-chain osmosis degen type activity?
Yeah, so I think, our altruistic hope at Regen Network is that, primarily people are going to buy digital carbon credits and retire them for carbon credit claims, because that's the most efficient way for us to really create climate action at scale. However, in this case, like you said, these are liquidity pools. So there's going to be people hopping in and out because there's rewards to be had that don't care what it is. And then there's, the Cosmos Zero campaign, which is a rallying cry from various protocols and, started from a rallying cry from validators that want to be carbon neutral, that have gone through governance proposals for their community pools. They're also going to be hopping into these pools, purchasing and retiring carbon credits. From the perspective of the supply of NCT, there's some on Celo, there's some on Polygon, and there will be some in the Cosmos. Right now, no more of this token type can be brought onto the blockchain from the legacy system. The legacy registry Vera stopped any new supply coming on. So the credits that are on chain that are eligible for NCT is a capped number. From basic microeconomics 101, the more of them that are retired, the higher the price ought to go if the demand stays flat. So it really depends on how people choose to integrate, IBC compatible NCT token into their products or their dApps. It depends on how many protocols want to offset and how many businesses in the Cosmos ecosystem want to offset. And it also depends on whether there's more demand activity for these assets in Cosmos, because there's likely to be arbitrage between SushiSwap on Polygon and osmosisDex in Cosmos. There's likely to be activity of people just degenning up and down the bridge, or up and down the bridges between Polygon and Celo. So I think it's going to be interesting, and it's cross-chain interesting, which I think is a new expansion pack of the degen, arbitrage game to play. So I hope people buy and retire carbon and buy and hold carbon because they care about climate. But I worked in finance, I have no illusion that there's money to be made and a game to be played here, and people are going to do that too, and that's fine. I'll pause there. I want to just see if Will has anything to say, and if there's any other questions about Cosmos Zero, I can answer them. And then, yeah, happy to have Will do the liquid staking jam he wants to do too.
Well, as far as the game theory stuff goes, I think, I mean, I won't comment on NCT, but at the big picture here, regeneration isn't happening quickly enough because, I mean, for one reason, because the financial infrastructure is not in place. So that's a lot of what Regen has set out to build here. That if that one of the ways Gregory talks about it is kind of aligning short-term and long-term economics here. That in the long term, if we're going to continue to have healthy healthy human communities, kind of thriving ecosystems, we need also these short-term instruments to be in place that compensate regenerative activity. So there is on the Regen Commonwealth this tokenomics conversation that's been ongoing, just about what are some of the ways that we could introduce other tokenomic mechanisms to incentivize scientific contributions, to incentivize insurance protocols, kind of a range of different ideas about what we could do there. But I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, so one more quick thing on Cosmos Zero before we jump over. I want to give you enough time for the liquid staking talk, but Osmosis agreed to purchase and retire enough NCT via governance proposal to offset its carbon emissions for 1 year. I'm kind of hoping to learn a little bit more since Osmosis was one of the like initial chains to do this. What does that process look like in practice? How will how will Osmosis's purchased and retired NCT translate to carbon emission offsets? Like, what does that process look like from purchase to retiring?
Yeah, so the technical process is that, whoever has that multi-sig for osmosis will make sure that you all have, and you will have, because you're launching the pools with us as LP providers. You basically make sure you have that number of credits that are NCT, and then you redeem that number of eco credits out of NCT, and you retire them to your Regen wallet. And we're recommending that if folks have like a community pool wallet that has an associated Regen address, to retire them there, because you're retiring on behalf of the protocol. So you're retiring on behalf of every token holder. So the technical activities are really quite simple. And that was part of the point of putting up the NCT pool, was to make that process only a couple of really simple steps. But the process that protocols are going through in general is the same as what Osmosis did: writing a governance proposal to community pools, asking the community if offsetting is important, finding the community funding for purchasing the offsets, and then purchasing and retiring the offsets to make the claims. So there are a number of other folks on this journey too. Checked and Empowered and IXO, Gravity and Regen are all through their governance. And Stargaze is about to go to vote. They retired for 2022 already last year through community governance, and they're doing 2023. And then Evmos is about to go to vote as well. And so it's just been kind of a community uprising, and there's dozens of validators involved, and it really started from validators that originally were asking, how do we figure out our footprint? How do we figure out a footprint of a protocol? Are there technologies here where we can purchase and retire carbon credits on chain here in the Cosmos ecosystem, because we want to take responsibility for our climate footprint? So we've been in this process of designing this whole experience with validators for about 1.5 years now.
Thank you for walking us through that. Water Spinner, did you want to take it from here on the liquid staking?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I have a couple questions for you, Will. I know, so the interchain accounts module will be enabling liquid staking derivatives of Regen. If you just want to talk a little bit about about that prop and whatnot, and then just a brief overview of LSDs before a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure. So on the Regen Commonwealth Forum right now, there is a proposal just to essentially put in place the pieces for us to be able to, well, I guess for people to be able to port their Regen through IBC over to Quicksilver and be able to liquid stake them. There's I'll link the forum thread. There's plenty of technical stuff we could get into there. I guess I think big picture, it's a fascinating time in the interchain ecosystem, because liquid staking is this thing that's been on the horizon for years, and now that, of course, Persistence had launched some version of it early on. Then Quicksilver got moving on things, and then Stride kind of beat them to market on implementation, but Quicksilver did end up launching and has some different functionality than Stride does. But I think there's going to be this whole cascade throughout this year of kind of this migration over to liquid staked assets being like the dominant asset type, as opposed to just unstaked assets. So I think there's a whole lot of interesting stuff to talk through, but I'll pause there and let you ask some questions, Water Spinner.
Yeah, one of my first questions would be kind of what's the benefit of having Q Regen over Regen as just your regular everyday holder?
So I guess when it comes to, if you're talking about DeFi applications, if you're talking to someone who has assets on Osmosis, the way that a lot of these liquid staked assets works, Quicksilver included, is that staking rewards are bundled back into the liquid staked asset. So over time, Q regen appreciates in comparison to regen. So this is great if you have your regen sitting in some pool over in osmosis. You're losing out on the staking rewards you would be getting if they were on regen staked. But with Q assets, that's not the case. You're essentially able to both be accruing the staking rewards and be accruing the DeFi, liquidity provisioning rewards or whatever you're doing with them. Very similar. I mean, it's kind of like in some ways, the mirror image to Superfluid on Osmosis.
Okay, so that'll kind of segue perfectly into my next question. If I were a quote on a regen degen, and I wanted to, take my Q regen and I wanted to stake and also LP. Does having Q regen affect validator sovereignty over the network at all, as far as like voting goes and all of that?
So, as far as I understand, currently, if you were Quicksilver and Regen are not yet live. You can't yet do this. You can only do it with stars so far, but hopefully in coming weeks you'll be able to do it with Regen. As far as I understand where they are right now, they distribute equally across the validator set. But they already have this feature that allows you to show your preference for who you want to be delegated to across the validator set with. So if I were to take my stars right now, just as an example, since you can actually do this right now, if I take my stars, put them on Quicksilver, I can set which validators I would like to be delegated to and in what weight. And a Quicksilver has been building to mimic as much as possible kind of every aspect of kind of governance and interface from the kind of traditional staking experience people are used to, so that way it's not compromising different governance dynamics. So as far as I understand in their roadmap there, you can already set these preferences, but they are not yet implemented. They're going to be implemented sometime in Q1 of this year. In short, no, it shouldn't like compromise stake distribution or governance or some of these other things we care very much about.
Yeah, that's super good to hear. Like, as somebody, if as someone that cares deeply about governance, if they also wanted to, LP all that region, they could, be part of both worlds, which is really awesome to hear. And that kind of takes me to my next two-part question. Was there a benefit or limiting factor to choosing Quicksilver over other liquid staking platforms? And then also, you plan on having multiple LSDs of regen in the future?
So I think why we've had this push around Quicksilver first is we really resonate with their ethos around governance. Everybody that's implementing liquid staking is doing it a little differently, and so far, I guess I just say kind of the attitudes around governance mesh quite well between the Quicksilver and Regen communities. And then there's just another, although there's definitely some other compelling options out there. We've had a relationship with the contributors to Quicksilver since day one. Joe Bowman was a lead validator on our testnet. Chorus One was also a lead validator. Chorus had written the original liquid staking research paper that then informed kind of a lot of the interchain research subsequent to that. So they, I guess we sort of feel like they know what they're doing better than anyone else out there in the space. And then as far as other, will there be Stride regen or other things like that? I'm sure there will be. I think it's just a question of There's limited time and energy, and let's take a first step of launching with one liquid staking protocol. Over time, I'm sure others will be adopted. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's the beauty of Cosmos is the ability of option and change. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are moving forward and have a good relationship going. Robo, Todd, did you guys have anything you wanted to add, or if there's anyone in the community that has some questions they want to post? I think now is a good time to maybe take
Yeah,
some.
I know we're running up against time here, so I just want to take this chance to quickly see if we have anyone from the community that wants to ask a question. And then while we're waiting for people to either raise their hands or pop a question in the chat, I did have one final question that I just kind of wanted to ask. These legacy systems that that Regen is trying to disrupt, right? They're not transparent. They're not accountable, or at least not as accountable as they should be. And I feel like that's kind of led to this sort of unfair characterization of carbon credit markets or carbon credits in general. It's that they're not reliable, or you have some people even saying that they're like outright scams. And I just wanted to, I guess, to ask this is by bringing these markets on chain and bringing transparency and financial accountability to these markets, is that really like a core tenet, basically a core reason why blockchain, why taking this thing public, basically, or why bringing this to the blockchain space?
So these opaque, disconnected markets will be served by the transaction and data and claims transparency that blockchain technology inherently provides. They also will be well served by, the fact that blockchain allows for every individual project to be individually represented and not have a third party between them and a buyer. A buyer can be directly represented, individual can be represented, a scientist can be represented. These are not things that are so well connected or so obvious or obvious at all in the legacy systems, because so much of it is hidden in institutional broker networks. I think from the perspective of what Regen's doing that's disruptive, beyond just the let's use blockchain to make these markets more effective and authentic and transparent and efficient, we're trying to dig much deeper than that and say, how do you use blockchain technology to allow scientists to create new innovative methodologies that allow for other folks that are not currently included in these systems to be able to enter into these markets and to develop innovative ecological regeneration projects. As well as we're really hoping that there will be a strong community of land stewards and project developers and scientists that ultimately govern these standards on the blockchain, and that the discussions around what the standards are and the participation of that governance happens on chain, where it can be seen and engaged with and is publicly accessible. So we're trying to dig deeper into the standards themselves, because just digitizing poor standards doesn't make the system better. And there are real issues with a lot of the standards that these legacy carbon markets use. There are integrity issues. There are questions about if the science is updated quickly enough. There are a lot of ecological project types that there are no methods for. There are a lot of perverse incentives for issuing more credits than are real. And so we're trying to create a system where our process makes it so transparent that these types of structural issues can't necessarily arise. Do you have anything you want to add, Will? Because you definitely hold a lens from the land steward perspective that I don't often get to hold.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'd throw in here from the foundation perspective and from the governance perspective is that, which definitely dovetails with what Sarah's saying, but maybe another way of saying this is, if we don't have the people and the scientists that are on the ground in direct relationship with these landscapes and these places and these practices, participating in the governance and essentially structure of these markets, then we're going to end up with some really perverse dynamics and some things that just don't make sense. And a lot of the kind of stuff that you're reading about in the news, if you've been following carbon markets and other things like that. So I think it's there's something about Cosmos that especially with the groups module coming online and some of the interfaces that will be going live there, will just allow a very tight kind of meshing of on-the-ground communities, tech stacks, financial markets, scientific methodologies, just have these things all in sync with each other, so that way we can have coherent approaches to addressing these things that have that kind of informed decision makers actually making the decisions instead of kind of random third parties that might be missing really key elements about what's going on.
That was great. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know we're up against time here, and I don't see any questions in the chat. So just kind of wanted to give this opportunity to you both to say some closing remarks. And again, just really thank you for coming on and chatting with us. It's been great.
Well, I guess I'd say thank you guys so much for hosting us today. I know it's been in the works for a little while. I think we initially were on the books for over a month ago or something, and then this got bumped back, and so glad that things lined up today, and then we got to talk through all this stuff. So Tog, Water Spinner, Robo, and of course Sarah, thank you all for being here.
Yeah, I'll echo Will. Thank you for having us. And I think in general, Regen's super psyched about our, long-standing partnership with the osmosis community. We're super psyched y'all wanted to create the big carbon market, on Dex here in the Cosmos community. We're stoked that y'all were the first community to vote to offset your protocol footprint. I just feel like we're just getting started on how climate impact and these marketplaces can really create a lot of change in the world. And there's a lot of innovation that we can co-create together. So we are grateful for our osmosis friends and look forward to the NCT pool launch, which hopefully will only be a few more weeks. And we'll definitely share some public updates once we know the timeline, y'all. So you're all ready to hop in and do your thing. Thanks again for having us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it. Looking forward to this NCT pool or these NCT pools as well. So yeah, thank you again, and I think we'll go ahead and close it out here. Really appreciate your time.